The world in which she exists is ancient, a place where the boundary between the human and the supernatural is thin, and the forces that govern the land are as old as the hills themselves. The air is thick with the scent of incense, the murmur of forgotten prayers, and the rustle of old, tattered scrolls that speak of rites and rituals passed down through generations. This is a realm where magic is real, where the gods are both revered and feared, and where the blood of the innocent and guilty alike stains the earth. It is a land marked by cycles of light and darkness, where the sun rises not just over the horizon, but over an eternal war between the forces of creation and destruction. Among the towering trees of the sacred forests and the crumbling temples long abandoned by time, the people whisper of ancient practices, rites meant to test the spirit, cleanse the soul, and appease the gods. These rituals, though feared, are an integral part of their existence. To some they are a form of redemption, to others they are a curse, a torment beyond measure. And yet, despite the horror they inspire, there is an undeniable beauty to the ancient traditions, an allure rooted in mystery, power, and the unfathomable will of the gods. At the heart of this land, under the gaze of the moon, where the ancient rituals unfold in secrecy, lives the protagonist. Her name is Asha, a name given to her long ago meaning life, but in truth her name has become a mockery of the fate she now faces. Asha is no longer the hopeful, vibrant young woman she once was. Her life has been overshadowed by her transgression, a wrong that cannot be undone, a sin that echoes through her every breath. She stands at the center of an age-old tradition, one that demands she kneels in the ashes for 40 nights, paying the price for a crime that was both hers and not hers to commit. Asha's past is a tapestry of bright promises, bitter betrayals, and shattered dreams. She was once a daughter of the sun, a girl full of laughter and promise, living in the tranquil village of Kalari, a place where the earth hummed with life and the skies were always open. But her innocence was shattered by a forbidden love, a love that transcended the boundaries of what was sacred. She fell in love with someone not of her world, a wandering spirit, a being of darkness who had taken human form. In their secret meetings beneath the moonlit sky, they shared whispered secrets of the universe, their hearts bound by an unholy connection. But the gods saw this love as an affront to the natural order. For the laws of the gods were clear. Love between the mortal and the ethereal was not to be. To them, it was an act of defiance, a tearing of the fabric that held the world together. Her crime was not just the love she had borne for this spirit, but the oath she had broken, an oath to the gods themselves to remain pure and untouched by such dark forces. In a moment of weakness or perhaps desperation, she made a choice that would cost her everything. The spirit, though a creature of darkness, had loved her in return, and together they had forged an unbreakable bond. But the gods, in their eternal wisdom and unyielding law, punished them both. Her lover was cast into the abyss, a fate worse than death, and she was left to face the consequences alone. The punishment for her crime was severe, more severe than anything she had ever imagined. She was to kneel in the ashes of her own guilt for 40 nights, a ritual of suffering meant to cleanse her soul and purify her from the darkness she had welcomed. The ashes, gathered from the sacred altars of the gods, were said to hold the power of judgment, the ability to burn away the sins of the soul, purify the heart, and strip away the impurities that had tainted her spirit. For 40 nights she would endure the ritual in solitude, alone in the desolate temple grounds, her body sinking into the cold, gritty ashes, the weight of her sin pressing upon her. The pain would be unbearable, a constant reminder of her mistake, of the price she had to pay. The ashes would seep into her skin, into her bones, and into the very depths of her soul, each night stripping her of her identity, of her essence, until there was nothing left but the bitter emptiness of her crime. But what the gods did not foresee, what they did not account for, was the strength of her will. Asha, despite the immense weight of her guilt and the overwhelming pain, found a strange, quiet defiance in the ashes. She would kneel, yes, but she would not be broken. She would endure the flames, the cold, the isolation, and the relentless sorrow, but she would not surrender to the darkness that the gods had set before her. As the first night stretched into the second, and the second into the third, something began to shift within her. The ashes that once seemed like a tool of her destruction began to feel like something else, something more. They were no longer just the symbols of her punishment, but the very stuff from which she would shape her rebirth. The gods had set a trial before her, one they believed she could never survive, but they had underestimated the power of her spirit. Her punishment had begun, but the end was far from clear. Would she rise from the ashes, or would the ashes consume her completely? The gods watched from their distant thrones, their eyes hidden behind veils of mist and shadow, but Asha did not care. She had no time for their judgment, no time for their rules. She was here in the heart of the storm, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of something new, something fierce, something untamed. The 40 nights stretched before her like an eternity, each one blending into the next as she succumbed to the torment of the ashes. But as the days passed, Asha began to understand something that no one had told her. The ritual, though painful, was not just a punishment. It was a path to something greater, something that neither the gods nor the spirits could ever have foreseen. It was a trial of transformation, of forging a new self from the remnants of a shattered soul. And though she would kneel as the gods demanded, she would also rise. The ancient land and its forgotten rituals had a way of shaping those who dared to walk its path. Asha's journey had only just begun. The ritual of kneeling in ashes was an ancient practice, feared by all who lived in the shadow of the sacred temples. The people of the village, nestled at the base of the craggy mountains, spoke of it in hushed tones, referring to it as both a punishment and a necessary purification. They would not dare question its necessity, for the gods had woven it into the very fabric of their world, a necessary evil that all who had transgressed must face. And now, Asha was bound to it, her body and soul tethered to the endless cycle of ashes, the cold grit grinding into her skin, marking her in ways she could neither comprehend nor escape. The ashes were not mere remnants of a fire that had burned out long ago, they were alive with meaning, with power, and with an undeniable weight. They had been gathered from the sacred altars, where offerings of incense, blood, and tears had once been made to appease the gods. These ashes were imbued with the power to purify, to destroy, and to transform. The belief was simple: through pain and humility, through surrendering to the purity of suffering, one could cleanse themselves of their sins, emerging from the fire renewed. Yet, no one could escape the cost. The ashes would burn into the very bones of the sinner, a reminder that redemption was not free, nor easily earned. For Asha, the toll began the moment she knelt in the first layer of ashes. The feeling of coldness was immediate, seeping through the fabric of her clothes, biting into her skin as though the ashes were alive, wrapping around her in an oppressive embrace. The weight of it settled over her like a blanket of despair, heavy with the ghosts of her past, the sins she had committed, and the punishment that now coursed through her veins. The skin of her knees began to sting, raw from the friction of the coarse, powdery substance. Each movement was a fresh agony, each shift in position only deepening the pressure that built within her joints. As the night stretched on, the ache transformed into a deep, gnawing pain, the heat from her body colliding with the coldness of the ashes, sending waves of discomfort across her muscles and bones. She could not shift, could not rise, for the ritual demanded that she remain in place, that she kneel, body and spirit surrendered to the ashes that surrounded her. But it was not just her body that felt the pain. Her mind, too, was assaulted by the suffocating weight of the ritual. Each night, as she knelt, the silence of the temple grounds became a vast, endless chasm that threatened to swallow her whole. At first, she tried to fill the silence with thoughts of escape, with memories of the past, of a life before the ritual, before the curse that had placed her in this wretched position. But the longer she stayed, the harder it became to remember who she once was. The ashes, like a relentless tide, seemed to erase everything. With each passing night, she felt herself slipping further into a void, her sense of self dissipating like smoke in the wind. She was no longer Asha, the girl who had loved and lost, but a shadow of that girl, a specter bound to the earth by the weight of her transgressions. Her body ached in ways she had never known, but it was the gnawing sense of isolation that threatened to break her spirit. The village, once so full of life and laughter, seemed a distant memory, its people now mere whispers carried by the wind. The ashes were not only a physical torment, they were a mental one too. Asha began to hear strange sounds in the stillness of the night. Whispers, barely audible, would curl around her ears, brushing against her consciousness like a fleeting dream. At first, she thought them to be figments of her exhausted mind, the delusions of a woman driven to madness by pain and guilt. But the whispers persisted, growing louder each night. They spoke to her in voices she could not place, voices that were both familiar and foreign. At times, they would remind her of her crime, recounting the forbidden love she had once known, as though the ashes themselves were a reflection of her sins, mirroring the darkness that had tainted her soul. Other times, they would simply murmur incoherently, as if lost in an eternal conversation just out of reach. The words were fragments, impossible to understand, but their presence was undeniable, their weight pressing against her chest like a hand, urging her to listen, to pay attention. It was as if the very air she breathed had been steeped in the spirits of those who had undergone the ritual before her, their voices still lingering in the ashes, trapped in the very soil of the sacred ground. As the nights wore on, these whispers grew more intense, more tangible. Asha began to see things, flickers of movement out of the corner of her eye, shadowy figures that danced in the periphery of her vision. At first, she dismissed them as hallucinations, the product of her deteriorating state. But soon the figures became more defined, more real. They were not human, nor were they fully spirit. They were something else, creatures born of the ashes themselves, twisted and broken, yet somehow familiar. Their eyes were dark, empty, and their forms seemed to shift with the shadows, like smoke caught in the wind. They would stare at her from the corners of the temple grounds, watching her with an eerie, patient stillness. Some nights they would approach her, but always just out of reach. It was as if they were waiting for something, perhaps for her to make a move, perhaps for her to acknowledge them. But she could not. She was bound to the ashes, bound to the earth, unable to move or speak. The presence of these figures, of these spirits, grew more pronounced with each passing night. Asha began to question whether they were real or if they were simply figments of her exhausted mind, reflections of her own guilt and suffering. But the longer the ritual continued, the more she felt their influence on her, as if they were slowly seeping into her consciousness, altering her thoughts, twisting her perception of reality. They were the remnants of those who had knelt before her, their spirits forever trapped in the ashes, unable to move on. And now it seemed they were waiting for her to join them. As the days stretched on, the supernatural forces at play in the ritual became undeniable. The ashes themselves seemed to have a life of their own, responding to her presence, shifting and swirling as though they were alive, as if they were part of something greater than herself. The whispers, the figures, the strange sensations, they all combined into something greater, something more powerful. The ritual was no longer just a punishment, it was a doorway, a threshold to another world, one where the lines between the living and the dead, the real and the imagined, were blurred beyond recognition. Asha was caught in the middle of it all, a pawn in a game she did not fully understand, but one she could not escape. Each night, as she knelt, the ashes gnawed at her body and soul, pulling her deeper into their grip. The pain was unbearable, but so too was the sense of power that slowly began to awaken within her. The ritual was not just breaking her, it was shaping her, remaking her into something else entirely. Something that neither the gods nor the spirits could have foreseen. Before the ashes, before the ritual, before the weight of the gods' judgment fell upon her, Asha had been a different person. One filled with light, with laughter that could rival the melodies of the birds, and eyes that sparkled like the stars above the village of Kalari. She had been a daughter of the earth, a creature of joy and hope, destined to become one of the village's most beloved figures. The villagers often spoke of her as a symbol of purity, the very embodiment of grace and humility, a girl who seemed untouched by the world's darker forces. Yet, beneath the surface of her gentle nature, there had always been something wild, something untamed, that yearned for more than the simple life her village offered. Kalari was a place of peace, nestled in a fertile valley surrounded by great forests and rivers. The people there lived simple, humble lives. They were farmers, healers, and artisans, their days spent in the rhythm of nature. The air was thick with the scent of fresh earth and growing things, and the village itself was a patchwork of simple homes, stone paths, and fields of golden crops. It was a world removed from the turmoil and chaos of the outside world, a place where time seemed to slow down, and the rhythms of life beat in sync with the land. Asha's parents were among the most respected members of the community, her mother a healer with hands that could soothe even the most stubborn of ailments, and her father a farmer known for his skill in cultivating the rarest and most beautiful flowers. Asha, as a child, had always been enamored by the mysteries of the forest, the whispers of the wind in the trees, and the stories her mother would tell her of the old gods and spirits who once walked the earth. These spirits, her mother explained, were not mere myth or legend, but living, breathing beings who held sway over the world in ways no mortal could understand. They existed in the spaces between things, in the shifting of shadows, in the songs of the river, and in the rustling of the leaves. They were both protectors and punishers, their favor as fleeting as the wind and their wrath as relentless as a storm. Asha's fascination with the supernatural grew as she matured. She began to spend more time in the woods, wandering the forest paths alone, talking to the spirits she believed resided there, hoping to catch glimpses of them among the trees. She would sit by the river listening to the songs of the water, dreaming of far-off lands and adventures. Her parents, concerned, warned her to keep a safe distance from the old gods and spirits. The world of magic, they cautioned, was not one to be trifled with. But Asha, young and full of wonder, believed that she could commune with them in peace. She did not understand the dangers of crossing into realms that were not meant for humans. It was during one of these solitary walks in the forest that she first encountered him. A figure cloaked in shadows, standing at the edge of a clearing where the light seemed to bend and twist in strange patterns. He was tall, his form dark and indistinct, like a shadow cast by the moon, yet his eyes burned with a light that drew her in. His presence was both unsettling and irresistible, an ethereal magnetism that seemed to pull at the very core of her being. His voice when he spoke was a low melodic whisper, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but it carried an undeniable power, a weight that she could not ignore. "Do you seek the spirits?" he had asked her, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. Asha, though startled, found herself unable to resist the pull of his gaze. "Yes," she had replied, her voice trembling. "I seek them to understand, to learn the secrets of the world." The figure smiled, a faint, knowing smile that seemed to carry 1,000 unspoken promises. "The secrets of the world are not to be shared lightly," he had warned. "But there is always a price, little one, for knowledge." Despite the warning in his voice, Asha felt no fear. She was drawn to him as if by destiny, as though she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. She asked him his name and he gave her only a whispered word, Zeroth. He was a spirit, a being not of the human world but a creature of darkness, born of the shadows that lingered at the edges of reality. His kind were neither wholly evil nor entirely good, but something in between, beings who lived in the liminal spaces, who played with the boundaries between light and dark, life and death. Over the following months, Asha and Zeroth met in secret, in the depths of the forest, hidden from the eyes of the village. They would talk for hours, sharing stories and secrets, his voice like silk, pulling her deeper into a world she had never known existed. Zeroth told her of realms beyond the physical world, of powers that lay dormant, waiting to be awakened. He spoke of the gods, of the delicate balance they maintained, and of the forbidden knowledge that lay within reach of those brave enough to seek it. And in turn, Asha confided in him her deepest fears, her desires, and her longing for something greater than the simple life she had known. It was during one such meeting that their bond grew stronger, crossing a line that should never have been crossed. The love they shared, though born of curiosity and mutual understanding, quickly turned into something far deeper. A forbidden love, a love between the mortal and the supernatural, a love that would forever alter the course of her life. The consequences of this love, however, were swift and devastating. The gods, who watched from their thrones in the heavens, did not take kindly to such defiance. Asha's love for Zeroth was a violation of the ancient laws, a breach of the sacred order that governed the world. The gods had long decreed that no mortal should entwine their heart with a being of darkness, for such unions threatened the balance of the cosmos. The consequences were not just for Asha but for Zeroth as well. In an act of divine retribution, the gods cast him into the abyss, a realm of eternal darkness and suffering far from the world of the living. But Asha was not spared. Her crime in their eyes was unforgivable. She had not only broken the sacred laws of the gods, but she had also betrayed her own people, her own purpose. To redeem her, to purge her of the darkness she had willingly embraced, the gods decreed that she would endure the ritual of ashes. The punishment was severe, 40 nights of torment, kneeling in the sacred ashes, alone with her guilt and her shame. It was to be a process of purification, of suffering so that her soul could be cleansed, so that she could atone for the sin of her love and her betrayal. Asha had not known the full extent of what the ritual would entail when she first committed her crime. She had not understood the power of the gods, nor the severity of their retribution. She had thought that love could transcend all things, that nothing could separate her from Zeroth. But now, as she knelt in the ashes, the weight of her actions bore down on her, and she realized just how little she had truly understood. It was the gods themselves, the powerful, inscrutable beings who controlled the fate of all mortals, who had cursed her. But perhaps, in their eternal wisdom, they had also set her on a path to something greater. Asha's journey was only beginning, and though the ashes were cold and suffocating, they would eventually lead her to the truth, a truth that neither she nor the gods had fully anticipated. The first night had been the hardest. Asha had hardly been able to bear the weight of the ritual, the ashes creeping into every crevice of her body, settling into her bones like a poison. The coldness of the earth beneath her knees felt like 1,000 needles piercing her flesh, and the rough texture of the ash scraped at her skin with every movement. The pain had been overwhelming, but what truly drove her to the edge was the silence. the oppressive silence that filled the space around her, thick and suffocating. There were no sounds except for the occasional whisper of the wind through the trees, and yet, within that silence, something lurked. Something watching. The longer she knelt, the more it pressed against her, a force too heavy to ignore. The first night she had nearly given in. The isolation was unbearable, and the ache in her body was like a living thing, a gnawing, relentless torment. Yet she endured, somehow, and when the night finally passed she felt a small, bitter victory in the survival of it. As the second night drew near, the physical toll deepened. The ache in her knees became a permanent fixture, the skin chafed and raw, though she did not dare to move. She had been warned that the ritual would break her, that it was designed to strip her of everything she was, her strength, her identity, her will. But what the gods had not prepared her for was the depth of her spirit. A part of herself she had never known existed until the ashes began to erode away the fragile facade of her former self. She had come here broken, a girl in mourning, seeking redemption for a love that was both cursed and divine. But now, as the nights dragged on, she felt something stirring within her, something that had been dormant for as long as she could remember. The pain was still there, unbearable, constant, but as she knelt in the ashes something strange began to happen. The shadows of the temple grounds grew longer, the flickering light of the moon casting eerie shapes across the ground. The first time she saw it, she thought she had imagined it. A shadow moving just out of her line of sight, a form so distorted and flickering that it seemed to disappear as soon as she tried to focus on it. But then it happened again. And again. Asha felt her heart race, the blood pounding in her temples as the shadows in the periphery of her vision began to shift, to move as if alive. The air grew heavier, thicker with each passing night. The winds carried strange sounds, distant whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. They did not speak clearly at first, but with each night they grew more distinct, more urgent. They were not the whispers of the past, nor the echoes of other souls. These voices were something else. They felt alive, like they were coming from within her own mind. Then came the dreams. The dreams were unlike anything she had ever known. Each night, when she finally allowed herself to fall into an exhausted sleep, she would be pulled into a strange ethereal world, a place where time seemed to fold in on itself, where the laws of nature no longer applied. The landscape would shift and warp, like smoke caught in the wind, swirling around her as though the very earth beneath her was alive. Sometimes she would stand alone in a field of blackened flowers, their petals shimmering in the moonlight, while other times she would be submerged in a river of liquid silver, her body weightless as the water wrapped around her like a lover's embrace. And always in the distance she would see the figure of Zeroth, his dark eyes watching her from the shadows, his form both familiar and distant. He was a ghost, a memory, and yet, in the depths of her dreams, he seemed as real as the world around her. The dreams were intoxicating, filling her with both desire and dread. The lines between the waking world and the dreamscape blurred until she could no longer tell where one began and the other ended. She would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest, as if Zeroth had been standing beside her, whispering words she could not understand. And then, in the darkness, the whispers in the temple would begin again, faint at first and then louder, clearer. The voices were no longer just the product of her tired mind. She felt them stirring within her as though something ancient, something powerful, was awakening in her soul. The ashes, once symbols of her punishment, now seemed to pulse with a life of their own. They were no longer just cold, lifeless remnants but something more, something that reached deep within her, binding her to the world in ways she could not explain. Yet, as the visions and whispers grew stronger, so too did the pain. Her body, already frail and exhausted, felt as though it was breaking under the weight of the ritual. Each night, the ashes seemed to grow heavier, suffocating her in their relentless grip. The rawness in her knees, the burning ache in her muscles, the way her body trembled with exhaustion, it was all too much. The darkness of isolation began to seep into her thoughts, clouding her mind with doubts and fears. She questioned herself, questioned her choices, questioned the very foundation of her existence. Was she truly seeking redemption? Or was she simply trying to appease a wrath that was beyond her control? Was this punishment the end of her story, or was it the beginning of something far more terrifying? On the seventh night, as the whispers became a constant presence in her mind, she nearly gave in. The weight of the ritual was too much to bear. Her body was trembling, her mind fraying at the edges. She wanted to scream, to cry out, to demand an end to it all. The doubts were consuming her, and she feared that the ashes would swallow her whole, turning her into a hollow shell of the person she had once been. It was in that moment of despair that she felt the first stirrings of defiance. She did not know where it came from, but it surged through her like a tide. A deep, primal anger rose within her, an anger not at the gods, not at the punishment but at herself, for allowing herself to be broken so easily. The next night, something inside her shifted. She could not explain it, could not name it, but she felt a surge of energy, a strange power awakening from deep within the core of her being. The pain was still there, sharp and unyielding, but now it no longer felt like something meant to break her. It felt like something she could wield. The ashes, instead of suffocating her, seemed to pulse with a strange energy, almost as if they were responding to her will. The whispers, once distant and unclear, now spoke directly to her, urging her forward, calling her to rise above the suffering. Night after night, Asha began to change. Her body was still weak, still racked with the agony of the ritual, but there was a glimmer of something new within her, something that had been hidden beneath the ashes, beneath the weight of her guilt and shame. She had come to the temple a broken woman, desperate for redemption, but now, as the night stretched on, she began to understand that the ashes were not her prison. They were her crucible. The transformation had begun, not just in her body but in her soul. The defiance that had first awakened as a spark now burned with a quiet, unyielding fire. She was no longer just enduring the punishment, she was embracing it. She was becoming something more, something that neither the gods nor the spirits had anticipated. And in the dark, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The shadows seemed to shift around her, taking form as if something was watching, waiting. And as Asha knelt there in the ashes, the first true feeling of power surged within her, something deep and ancient, something that connected her to the world beyond the veil. She was not broken. She was being forged. The 40th night arrived like a storm on the horizon, a heavy, suffocating weight that seemed to press upon Asha's chest long before the first light of dusk had even begun to fall. She had made it this far, her body and spirit pushed to the brink by the agonizing nights of suffering and self-imposed isolation. The previous days had blurred into one continuous stretch of agony, of whispers and visions, of strange awakenings that no longer felt like mere figments of her imagination. She had come to accept the ritual as part of her, a force that shaped her with each passing hour, each scrape of the ash against her skin, each moment of unbearable pain. The power that had begun to stir within her was now a constant, a hum beneath her thoughts, a promise of something greater. But on the 40th night, something happened that neither Asha nor the gods could have foreseen. The ritual was not simply ending. It was shifting, changing into something far darker, more profound. The night was thick with the smell of burning wood, the air colder than it had been in the nights before. The ashes around her, which had been no more than a dull gray dust for all the previous nights, now began to glow faintly, as though some hidden force within them had been awakened by the approach of this final, fateful hour. The sensation was immediate, a heat, sharp and consuming, that began at her knees and spread upwards, crawling up her body like a wildfire. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the mind, perhaps a feverish delusion brought on by the days of deprivation and exhaustion. But then the burning became undeniable. The pain was not just physical, it was something deeper, something that clawed at the very center of her being. It was as if the ashes themselves had become alive, turning on her, wrapping around her like a cocoon of fire, searing her flesh in a way she had never felt before. She cried out, but no sound escaped her lips. The fire within the ashes pressed against her, crawling deeper into her skin, igniting her nerves with an intense, almost primal pain. It was not the same as the previous nights. There was no coldness, no numbing ache to dull the intensity. This was pure fire, a molten rage from within the earth itself, and it threatened to consume her entirely. But in that moment, something inside of her snapped. It wasn't fear that surged through her, nor pain, nor even despair. It was defiance. A fire of her own. She felt it deep within her, a primal, uncontrollable force, a connection to something far older than she could comprehend. The very air around her seemed to shift, thickening with power. She could hear the whispers again, but this time they were no longer just soft voices carried on the wind. They were loud, urgent, almost frantic. They spoke of transformation, of ancient powers that lay dormant within her, of a force that had been waiting for the right moment to awaken. The figure of Zeroth appeared in the periphery of her mind, his dark eyes flickering in the shadows, urging her to embrace it. And so she did. In a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time, she allowed herself to surrender, not to the pain but to the fire. The energy within her exploded outward, like a dam breaking, releasing torrents of power she had never known she possessed. It was as if the ashes themselves had become part of her, as though they were no longer a punishment, but a conduit, a gateway to something ancient and untapped. The air around her shimmered with heat, a haze that warped her vision, and the very ground beneath her seemed to tremble. The fire in her veins surged, and in that moment, Asha's mind was consumed by a blinding clarity. She understood that she was no longer just a mortal girl. She was something else, something that had been forged through suffering, through the depths of darkness, and through the blood of her ancestors. The ashes had become her baptism, her transformation. The pain, once overwhelming, now felt like a spark that had ignited something greater within her. Her hands, trembling from the heat, shot out to press against the ground, but the ashes seemed to bend to her will, swirling around her, shifting and moving as if they were alive. The glow from the ashes deepened, flickering like the heart of a flame, casting long shadows across the temple ground. She felt it now, a deep, overwhelming current of power running through her, as though the very earth beneath her was feeding it to her, infusing her with strength, with purpose. Her body began to change. Her skin, once raw and chafed from the brutal ritual, began to glow with an ethereal light. Her eyes, once dull with fatigue and despair, now flickered with a bright, unnatural light, a burning, molten blackness that mirrored the flames that coursed through her veins. It was a transformation so profound, so consuming, that she could no longer tell where the ashes ended and she began. The transformation was not only physical. Her mind, too, was expanding, racing with knowledge that had not been hers before. The whispers, which had once been incoherent, now spoke in clear, distinct words, ancient truths, forgotten secrets, and forbidden knowledge. She understood the rituals of the gods now, their purpose, their machinations. She understood the delicate balance of the world, and how her very existence threatened to disrupt that balance. She had come here as a mortal, cursed by the gods for her love, her transgression. But now, in this moment, she was something more. She was an agent of the ashes, of the fire that burned within the earth, a vessel for power that could either heal or destroy depending on her will. The very air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath her knees seemed to pulse as if it were alive. Asha's vision blurred as her body adjusted to the overwhelming surge of energy. Her muscles ached with the force of it, but she no longer felt the crippling weight of exhaustion. Instead, she felt something else, something that replaced the pain with strength, with an overwhelming sense of purpose. And then, as quickly as the transformation had begun, the flames within her began to subside, leaving her breathless but unbroken. The ashes around her lay still, no longer alive with the intensity they had once held. Asha's eyes flickered open, and she saw that the world had shifted. The stars above seemed to glow brighter, and the shadows of the temple seemed to stretch longer, deeper into the earth, as though they were part of something greater, something ancient that had been awakened along with her. She was no longer the girl who had entered the temple on the first night, trembling with fear and guilt. She was something else, something powerful and dangerous. The gods had meant to break her, to strip her of everything she was. But in the ashes, in the fire, she had been reborn. And now, on the 40th night, with the final whispers of the ritual ringing in her ears, Asha realized that she had gained something far more than redemption. She had gained power. And she would use it, to break the chains that bound her, to seek her revenge, and to reclaim the love that had once been torn from her. As Asha stood in the clearing, her black eyes reflecting the eerie glow of the moon, the weight of the transformation settled around her like a shroud. The flames of her awakening had dimmed, yet the power within her simmered, threatening to break free at any moment. The air was still, too still, and for a brief moment, a strange quiet fell over her, not the silence of desolation, but a stillness that seemed to hold the answers she had been searching for throughout her trial. The whispers, which had once been a constant presence, now faded into the background, replaced by a deeper, more resonant voice, one that seemed to echo from the very earth beneath her feet. "You are not cursed, Asha." The words vibrated through the air, not spoken aloud but felt deep within her mind. They were neither a command nor a prophecy but a revelation, a truth that had been hidden from her all along. The voice was familiar, yet foreign, carrying the weight of something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. Asha stood frozen, her breath shallow, as the truth began to unfurl before her like the pages of a long-forgotten manuscript. "This was never meant to break you." The voice continued, gentle yet firm, as if guiding her through the maze of her own thoughts. "The ritual was never a punishment, nor a means to destroy you. It was always meant to awaken what lay dormant inside you, to reveal the power that has coursed through your bloodline for generations." Asha's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of those words pressing against her chest, the full implications of their meaning starting to take shape. The ritual, the ashes, the suffering, it had all been for something far greater than her own redemption. She had believed she was merely a sinner, condemned for some past transgression, a mistake that had led her to this trial. But now, as the truth began to settle into her bones, she realized she had been wrong. The gods hadn't punished her. They had tested her, shaped her, to reveal the power she had never known she possessed. You were always meant to become this. The words came clearer now, the voice resonating with a deeper force. The prophecy has long spoken of a soul who would rise from the ashes, one who would inherit the power of the shadows and with it, the ability to alter the very course of fate. You are the chosen one, Asha. This trial, these nights of suffering were not meant to break you. They were designed to forge you, to help you embrace your destiny. Asha's heart pounded in her chest, and her breath caught in her throat. Chosen? Destiny? A prophecy? She had never believed in such things. She had never imagined herself as a part of something larger, something that reached back to the very roots of the earth and extended forward into the future. And yet, here she stood, eyes black as night, a force of power awakening within her. She had been destined for this moment, for this purpose, long before she had even understood what it meant. The ashes that had once seemed so suffocating, so cruel, now revealed their true meaning. They had not been a symbol of her punishment but a medium through which the power could rise. They were the catalyst, the crucible in which her true self had been forged. The gods had not been trying to destroy her, they had been guiding her through a process of purification, of rebirth. The pain, the isolation, the whispers, they were all pieces of a larger design, meant to prepare her for what she was to become. Your punishment was never about retribution. The voice softened as if understanding her confusion. It was about awakening what was always inside you, the power that you have carried within you since your first breath. You are not merely a mortal, Asha. You are the vessel of something ancient, something that has been dormant for centuries. The ritual was a test, yes, but a test to see if you could survive, if you could understand the weight of what you were meant to carry. And now you are ready. The realization hit Asha with the force of a tidal wave. The ritual, the ashes, the 40 nights of torment, they had all been part of a plan, a design meant to unlock her true potential. She had thought she was being punished for a crime, for a love that had been forbidden, for a curse she could never escape. But in truth, she had been chosen for something far greater. The path she had walked had not been one of degradation but one of transformation. She had not been punished for her mistakes. She had been tested to see if she could rise, if she could embrace the power that was her birthright. Now that you have embraced the darkness within you, the voice intoned, its presence growing stronger, you will see the world with new eyes. The curse that once bound you has been broken. You are no longer bound by fate. You are the one who will shape it. Asha's mind raced as the weight of this truth settled over her. The prophecy had spoken of her for generations, a soul who would rise from the ashes and alter the course of fate. And now she understood. The power she had felt stirring within her was not something she had stumbled upon by accident. It had been there all along, lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The ritual, the suffering, the black eyes, they were all a part of the same plan, the same design to awaken her to her true purpose. She had come to the temple a girl seeking redemption. She had thought she was merely a pawn in the gods' hands, a victim of fate. But now she saw the truth. She was not a victim. She was a force. And the world, with all its mysteries, its dangers and its wonders, was now within her grasp. The ritual had been a test, but it was more than that. It had been a key to unlocking the power that had always been hers. The ashes had not been her prison. They had been her rebirth. And now, with her black eyes burning with a power that seemed to draw from the very depths of the earth, Asha understood her true purpose. She had been born for this. She had been destined to rise. The world was hers to shape. The air was thick with the weight of the unknown as Asha stood at the center of the clearing, the darkness of her eyes reflecting the moonlight. The whispers that had once seemed faint and distant were now no longer mere echoes. They were voices with intent, voices that carried the gravity of ages. The transformation she had undergone had unlocked not just power but a deep understanding of the forces at play. She now knew that she had not just been the subject of a ritual, but the very center of a cosmic design. A design that had been set in motion long before her birth. The voices, the entities, the gods who had watched her suffer, they were not distant or abstract anymore. They were tangible, and she could feel their presence pressing against her like a weight, a force that she could neither deny nor ignore. As the night stretched on, the moon hanging heavy above her, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. The air became charged with a tension that made her skin prickle. Something was coming. Something was awakening. She could sense it as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. You stand at the crossroads, Asha. The voice was not of one, but many, a chorus of deep, resonating tones that seemed to emanate from every corner of the earth. Asha's breath hitched in her throat as a figure began to emerge from the shadows. It was a form both regal and terrifying, a being cloaked in a swirling mist of darkness and light. The figure was neither male nor female, neither human nor divine. It was something more, something older. It moved with an air of authority, its presence commanding, its gaze unyielding. You have passed the trial, the figure spoke, its voice soft but undeniably powerful. But the path you take now is yours to choose. Asha's heart pounded in her chest. She had felt this presence before, in the whispers, in the visions, in the very ashes that had burned her. But now, in the flesh, it stood before her, its power palpable, its gaze piercing. It was one of them, one of the beings who had orchestrated her suffering, her transformation. But who were they? Were they gods, guardians, or something darker, more manipulative? And why had they chosen her? Who are you? Asha demanded, her voice trembling but defiant. Why have you done this to me? Why did you make me suffer? The figure tilted its head as if considering her words carefully. We did not make you suffer, Asha. We merely guided you, tested you. We did not create the trial, you did. You were always meant to awaken this power. This was never about punishment. It was about revealing your true self, unlocking the potential that has lain dormant in your bloodline for generations. Asha's fists clenched. The words stung, but there was a part of her that understood the truth in them. She had been chosen, yes. She had been transformed, yes. But the suffering had felt real, the isolation had felt unbearable. It had felt like a punishment, a cruel game, a twisted trial. And yet, this entity, this figure, spoke of it as if it were all part of a plan. You lie, Asha spat, her voice full of fury. You think you can justify this torment by calling it a test? Do you have any idea what it's like to endure this, to be broken by your own power, by your own transformation? The figure's eyes, glowing with a light that seemed to come from beyond the stars, softened ever so slightly. We know suffering, Asha. We are the ones who shaped this world, who set the trials in motion. We are not gods as you might understand them. We are guardians, keepers of balance. The ritual was necessary not to destroy you but to reveal the power within you. Power that has been dormant, waiting for the right moment. Asha's mind raced as the figure's words sank in. Guardians? Keepers of balance? They weren't gods in the way she had imagined, beings of divine will and omnipotence. No. These were entities older than time itself, forces that governed the very fabric of existence, forces that shaped destinies and tested the souls of mortals. They had not been malevolent, not in the way she had thought. They were not interested in punishment, they had only sought to awaken her, to set her on the path that she was always meant to walk. So, this is my fate then? Asha asked, her voice barely a whisper, filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. I'm to become one of you? A keeper of balance. The figure's gaze shifted as if searching her soul. You are no longer the girl you once were. You have seen the world with new eyes. Your power is now yours to command. What you choose to do with it, how you use it, will determine whether you walk the path of the guardians or become something else entirely. The world will need you, Asha. There will be others who seek to control your power, to use it for their own ends. But you must decide who you will be. Will you uphold the balance we have fought so long to protect, or will you break the chains of destiny and create your own path? Asha stood there, her mind spinning with the enormity of what she had just learned. The transformation had not been a curse, but a call to something greater. These guardians, these ancient beings, had not been trying to trap her in some divine game. They had been preparing her for what lay ahead, preparing her for a power that could shape the future of the world itself. But she could not ignore the lingering question, did they truly have her best interests at heart? Or were they manipulating her, pulling her strings like a puppet, using her as a tool to fulfill their own cryptic purpose? As the figure before her faded into the mist, Asha's gaze remained fixed on the spot where it had been. The air around her felt charged, the power within her thrumming with untapped potential. The ritual had revealed her true self, but the revelation had also opened a door to a deeper mystery. The world was waiting, and so were the forces that had guided her, tested her, and now expected her to carry the weight of a destiny that she could not yet fully understand. I choose, Asha murmured to herself, her voice steady, though filled with uncertainty. I choose to challenge what has been set before me. I choose my own path. And with that, the night fell silent once again, as the echoes of her decision lingered in the air like a prophecy yet to be fulfilled. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting its pale light over the clearing, where Asha stood alone, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm. The confrontation with the mysterious guardians had left her with more questions than answers, yet there was one undeniable truth that now echoed in the deepest corners of her mind. The power that surged through her veins was hers and hers alone. No longer a prisoner to the ashes, no longer bound by the mortal world, she was standing on the precipice of a choice that would shape not only her future but the very balance of the world itself. Asha's heart pounded in her chest, the sound deafening in her ears. She could feel the darkness within her, a heavy force that simmered beneath her skin, itching to be unleashed. It was no longer just a symbol of transformation. It was a living, breathing entity that called to her. It offered her strength, unimaginable power, and the ability to right the wrongs of her past. It whispered of vengeance, the burning desire to make those who had wronged her pay. She could hear the voices of those who had cast her aside, those who had betrayed her, mocking her, reminding her of the years lost to their cruelty. The power within her stirred at their names, hungry for retribution. But Asha knew deep down that vengeance alone would not bring her peace. She had seen what happened to those who were consumed by their thirst for revenge. They lost themselves in the darkness, became nothing more than shadows of their former selves. She had felt the coldness of that abyss when the ritual had begun to strip away her humanity. To embrace vengeance, to wield this power with hatred and anger as its guiding force, was to lose herself forever. Yet, redemption was another path that beckoned her, just as tempting, just as fraught with peril. She could use the power within her to heal, to restore the balance that had been disrupted by her past mistakes. There were those she could save, those who needed her strength. She could use her newfound abilities to fight against the darkness that had once threatened to consume her, to protect the innocent from the same forces that had once tormented her. But the weight of that responsibility was immense. Could she truly use this power to do good? Was she capable of redemption after everything she had endured? Or would the shadows within her, the darkness that had become part of her essence, always pull her toward the edge of destruction? Then there was the higher purpose, the path that seemed the most daunting of all. The guardians had spoken of balance, of a role she was destined to play in the grand scheme of the world. She could choose to embrace her true self, to walk the path of the ancient ones, and to protect the delicate equilibrium of life and death. But such a path would demand everything from her: her autonomy, her morality, her very soul. The responsibility was suffocating, the cost unimaginable. She would no longer be a woman of flesh and blood but a vessel for forces beyond her understanding. Could she truly accept such a fate? Or was she simply a pawn in a game much larger than herself, a pawn that had just been given the power to move? Her mind reeled as the internal conflict raged on. She had always been the one who sought to control her destiny, to carve her own path. But now, with the world at her feet and the darkness in her eyes, she felt more like an instrument of fate than its master. The choices lay before her like forks in a road, each one leading to a different future. Each one held its own promise and its own curse. And as she stood there, feeling the weight of the power coursing through her, she realized that the greatest challenge was not facing the external forces that awaited her, but confronting the darkness within herself. Her gaze dropped to the ground, where the ashes still lay, remnants of the ritual that had started this journey. The very ground beneath her feet had been the source of her pain, her suffering, and her rebirth. She had once knelt in these ashes, broken and lost, a prisoner of her past. But now those ashes were part of her. They were her foundation, the catalyst that had unlocked her potential. Would she walk away from that? Or would she embrace the very force that had shaped her into something both terrifying and powerful? The voices inside her mind grew louder, the whispering shadows urging her to embrace the darkness fully, to seize control of her destiny with an iron grip. But in her heart, Asha felt the pull of something else, something brighter though still faint. The chance for redemption, the chance to heal the wounds she had caused and protect the one she loved. Could she strike a balance between the two? Could she wield the power without being consumed by it? Could she be both the harbinger of destruction and the protector of life? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, steadying herself as the weight of the decision pressed down on her. She could feel the darkness inside her, that cold, oppressive force that had become so much a part of her. It offered her the power to change the world, to make those who had wronged her pay. But it also threatened to consume her, to turn her into something she feared. The temptation was overwhelming. But there was something else, a flicker of light within her, a sliver of the woman she had been before the ashes, before the transformation. That part of her still yearned for something more than power. It yearned for a purpose that transcended vengeance, something that could truly make a difference in the world, not out of anger but out of love. Love for those who had been hurt, love for the balance that had been disrupted. In the silence of the night, Asha made her choice. She would not let the darkness consume her. She would embrace the power but on her own terms. She would use it to heal, to restore the balance that had been broken, not through fear or hatred, but through understanding. She would become the force that guided the world back from the edge, not as a destroyer but as a protector. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, and the temptation to fall into darkness would always be there, but Asha knew now that she was strong enough to face it. She was not a puppet of fate. She was its master. "I choose," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I choose to be the one who decides what happens next." And with that, she turned away from the ashes, stepping into the unknown, ready to face whatever destiny awaited her. As Asha walked away from the clearing, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow across the land. The shadows that had once clung to her every step now seemed distant, fading with the night. The world around her was still, as if holding its breath, waiting for her next move. The air felt different, charged with an energy that hummed in tune with the new force coursing through her veins. Her black eyes, once a symbol of torment and fear, now burned with a calm, unwavering determination. Her decision, though difficult, had set her on a new path, one that would not be defined by vengeance or blind obedience to an ancient prophecy, but by her own will. The power within her was vast, and though it still carried the weight of the shadows, Asha felt the warmth of something deeper, something that reminded her of the woman she had been before the ashes, before the trials. She was no longer the broken girl who had knelt in suffering. She was something else now, something greater but still undeniably human. In the days that followed, Asha returned to the village where her journey had begun. It was a place she had once known as home, a place that had seen the full extent of her fall from grace. She had been an outcast, punished for sins she hadn't fully understood. But now, with the power she had unlocked and the clarity of purpose that came with it, she was no longer the person she had been. The villagers watched her warily at first. They had heard the stories, the whispers of the girl who had vanished into the forest, who had endured the 40 nights in the ashes. They had seen the transformation in her eyes, the shift in her very presence. Some were afraid of what she had become, others were uncertain of what her return would mean. Would she bring destruction, the vengeance she had every right to seek? Or would she be a force for good, using her power to rebuild what had been broken? Asha stood before them, her voice steady as she spoke of the journey she had undertaken, of the trials she had faced and the choice she had made. She had come to understand that her suffering had not been in vain. It had shaped her, forged her into something new. And while the temptation to use her power for retribution still lingered, she had chosen a different path. She would be a protector, not a destroyer. She would stand against the forces that sought to divide the world, not out of vengeance, but out of a desire to restore balance, to heal what had been shattered. The villagers listened, some with doubt, others with hope. But as Asha spoke, she could see the change in their eyes. They saw her not as a monster or a legend, but as someone who had risen from the ashes, someone who had embraced her power not as a means to control, but as a gift to be used wisely. It was a new beginning not just for Asha but for them as well. But as much as Asha had found a new sense of purpose, the world had not suddenly become an easier place to navigate. The power she now wielded was not a simple tool to be used at her will. It was a force, ancient and dangerous, that required constant vigilance. There would be those who sought to use it for their own gain, just as there were those who would fear it and seek to destroy her because of it. The struggle, Asha knew, was far from over. She had embraced her destiny, but the weight of it was still heavy upon her shoulders. There were still trials to face, both internal and external. The darkness within her, though tempered by her choice to protect rather than destroy, would always be a part of her. She had made peace with it for now, but she knew that the line between light and shadow was never as clear as it seemed. The power she had embraced could easily slip into corruption if she wasn't careful. She would always be walking a tightrope, balancing the force within her with the needs of the world around her. Yet, as she stood in the village, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, she knew that the choice she had made was the right one. She had not succumbed to the darkness. She had not given in to the voices that promised power at the cost of her soul. Instead, she had chosen to shape her own destiny, to walk a path of her own making. But Asha understood now that the journey was never truly over. She had been forged in the fires of suffering, and though the ashes had settled, the embers would always remain. The trials of life would continue, and with them, the transformation would never cease. Perhaps peace was never the ultimate goal, she thought. Perhaps the struggle itself, the constant shaping and reshaping of the self, was the true purpose. After all, every trial led to a new understanding, every transformation to a deeper awareness of who she was and who she could become. The journey was not about escaping the darkness, but learning how to walk through it without losing oneself. As Asha walked away from the village, her steps sure and steady, she felt a strange sense of peace settle within her. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and unknown dangers. But she had learned one undeniable truth, that she was the one who held the power to decide how she would face them. The road would always twist and turn, but she would walk it with her eyes wide open, knowing that every step, every decision, would be a part of her transformation. The struggle, she realized, was never meant to end. It was the very nature of existence, a constant cycle of trials, suffering, and rebirth. And in that endless dance of light and shadow, she had found her place. Asha wasn't just a woman who had risen from the ashes. She was the flame that would continue to burn, lighting the way forward. And though the world would always test her, she would never again kneel in the ashes. She had embraced her power. Now she would embrace her destiny.